We turn now, we're going to hop across the pond, actually, to much closer to my home, as it's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Debra Cantor, who is a member of the first JTS Rabbinical School class that welcomed women. And Rabbi Cantor was ordained in 1988, and she is a spiritual leader of congregation B'nai Tikva Shalom, literally down the street from me in Bloomfield, Connecticut. So, Rabbi Cantor, welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Rabbi Wittenberg. So, Harayim Tovim, good afternoon, or morning, or maybe evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. So, before we begin, I want to make sure that you have paper, any kind of paper, computer paper is fine, any kind of paper, and something to write with, pen or pencil or both. And if you have anything else that you might want to use to add some color, colored pencils, crayons, watercolors, that's great too, but it's not necessary. We're going today for process, not product. So whatever we write, whatever we draw, whatever reflections take the form of something on your paper. The idea is not to create something that's going to be exhibited anywhere, but to create something for yourself and to be in the process. So that said, our title today is Standing at the Foot of Sinai. Who is with you and what do you hear? Who is with you and what do you hear? And let's put up the first slide if we could. Great. Standing at the foot of Sinai, who is with you and what do you hear? That's where we are at this moment. Whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening for you, that's where we are at this moment, the 49th day, the very, very end of the counting of the Omer, the 49th day of the counting since the beginning of Pesach, the last of the 3 days of prep for receiving Torah, Shloshet Yemei Hagbala, and we're here. We're ready. Although for some of us on the East Coast and certainly on the West Coast, we're maybe not quite ready. We might still be working on making blintzes or cheesecake or doing a few more errands before the Chag actually begins, before the holiday begins. But basically, we've all arrived. We're all in the neighborhood. We've all arrived at Sinai, waiting expectantly for what comes next. Now, our sages of blessed memory teach that spiritually speaking, we were all present for the giving of Torah, and that Torah is revealed to us anew each day. So we were all there back then, and we're all there right at this moment. They also teach that Torah is multivocal, that Torah speaks to each one of us individually in a voice, in a way that we can hear. So we're going to begin our session by delving into a couple of short texts and then using some creative writing and expressive abstract art, meaning it doesn't have to look like anything, to reflect on what these texts say to us after a year of pandemic. So let's frame our session. Let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide and frame our session with words of blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed, praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made our lives holy with your mitzvot and commanded us to engage with the words of Torah, not simply to study, lilmod, but to engage, to wrestle with, la'asok, to make Torah our business. And let's turn to our first text in just a moment from the book of Deuteronomy, which is a recapitulation of the experience at Sinai, similar but not identical to the way these events are described in the book of Exodus. So I think probably many of you know that there's a dating app called a Jewish dating app called Saw You at Sinai. And I want you to close your eyes for a minute and ask, who is around you? Who are you seeing at Sinai? Who's standing right nearby? Is it someone who invited you? Whom did you schlep along? Are there people who are standing with you but a bit further away? Is there somebody that you hadn't seen before? How do you feel being in the midst of this crowd? You know, we've been avoiding crowds now for well over a year. Are you happy or a bit trepidatious to be surrounded by so many people at this moment? Are you afraid the crowd might get unruly or be too noisy for you to hear God's voice and experience God's presence? So who is there and what do you hope for? What do you want to hear? Open your eyes and let's take a couple of minutes to write or draw your responses to that. Who is there? We'll take another minute. Let's look at this text that's on the screen from Deuteronomy 29, verses 13 to 14. Velo etchem levadchem, anochi koret et habrit hazot, ve'et ha'alah hazot. Not just with you, velo etchem levadchem, not just with you do I make this brit, this covenant, this arrangement with all of its sanctions and all of its details. Ki et asher yeshno po imanu, omed hayom lifnei Adonai Eloheinu, ve'et asher einenu po imanu hayom. I make this covenant today, not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here this day before the Lord our God, and with those who are not with us here this day. And with those who are not with us here this day. So the pshat, the contextual meaning, the Israelites who stood at Sinai, they had this powerful experience of hearing Torah, of apprehending God's presence, God's message. And they evidently also accepted upon themselves that message, that obligation for people yet to come, for generations yet to come, for us. Now, I don't know how that strikes you, but on the face of it, maybe that's not so fair. I mean, who did they think they were? Kind of chutzpahdik, isn't it? To say, I accept this set of obligations, this relationship with God as mediated through Torah. I accept it for myself, but that I also accept it on behalf and for and as binding upon future generations. But let's pause for a second and think, are there things that we accept for ourselves and take on as obligating for future generations? Think about that. And then the rabbis, the sages, do a really interesting thing. Instead of taking the view of back then and going into the future, they do a reversal. They say, look at where you are now, look at where we are now, and zoom back. They zoom us back. So we were there. And we have a chance to confirm the agreement that they took on our behalf. And in some mystical and Hasidic texts, we're there every time, not just on Shavuot, but every time, every day when we decide to accept Torah. Who is it who's there with you? And now, what are you ready to hear? Let's look at the next slide. Opening to Torah. Now that we're all assembled, the crowd quiets and gets more focused. No one shushes the crowd. There's no microphone. There's no exact signal, but somehow we know that the atmosphere has changed, and we try to open ourselves and be fully present. All right, time to shut down your cell phones or whatever else is distracting you. There's so many distractions. Holy One, bring us to that mountain where we all once stood, our souls opened like the buds of newborn flowers, open to receive your holy Torah written on the canopy of stars that you created. Open yourself. Shut down all the distractions. It's not often we do that. You're here assembled with everybody, but there's a special message for you. And I want you to think about in this moment right before the message comes. Right before. Take a moment to write down a word or two or three describing your feelings right now. The crowd is quiet. You can't even hear a bird chirp. How do you feel? All right, let's go to the next slide. Here it is. V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot, v'et halapidim, v'et kol hashofar, v'et hahar ashen, v'yar ha'am, v'yanu'u, v'yamdu merachok. We're all witnessing the thunder and the lightning, the blare of the horn and the mountain smoking. And it's weird. It's nothing we've ever experienced before. Ro'im et hakolot, we see the voices. We see the thunder. We see the voice of the shofar. We see it. We experience it on a level that really can't be described in normal words. What does it mean to see something that is a voice. What does it mean to see voices? Normally, if you said that, people would look at you askance, but here, all the people are witnessing this strange and overwhelming and powerful and scary thing. And it makes us vayanu'u, and it makes them jump back and now stand at a distance. Let's look at the next slide. And this is what the rabbis have to say about this in Midrash Rabbah. In Exodus Rabbah, it is stated, and all the people saw the sounds, saw the voices. That's the verse we just read. It's not written here sound, kol, but rather sounds, kolot. Rabbi Yochanan said, in trying to explain why the word kol is kolot, why it's in the plural, the voice, the singular voice, would go out and divide into 70 voices for the 70 languages so that all the nations would hear. And each and every nation would hear in the language of the nation, and their souls would depart. It was so terrifying. But Israel would hear, and they were not injured. Come and see how the voice would go out among all of Israel, each and every one according to their strength, according to what they could bear, according to what they could hear. The elders according to their strength, the young men according to their strength, the infants according to their strength, the sucklings according to their strength, the women according to their strength, and even Moshe according to his strength, in the strength of each and every one, and even the pregnant women according to their strength. So what out of this kolot, what out of this singular yet multiple voice, what is it that you hear? What is the Torah? What is the sacred teaching that you have learned over the past year since last Shavuot? What is the Torah you need to hear as we venture forth into the wilderness of the year to come? What strengths and insights, what Torah will you bring with you as we march forward? And what is it? How are you experiencing that right now? Do you hear God's still small voice? Do you hear a powerful, overwhelming charge? Take a moment and write or draw. What do you hear? What do you need to hear? Write or draw. What is the Torah you'll take with you into the coming year? What is the Torah your neshama, your soul, needs to hear? Sometimes I like to write a haiku at times like this. Remember writing haikus? Remember that I think we started doing it in 4th grade. 7, 5, and 7 syllables, 3 lines, 7, 5, and 7. And sometimes having that structure helps to pull out words for us. And maybe the Torah that you need to hear isn't so easily put into words. Maybe it's a feeling. So feel free not to use words, just to draw. Give you another minute. I'm going to conclude now with a wonderful poem by Merle Feld. And don't go to the next page yet. It's called, paradoxically, perhaps, We All Stood Together. And maybe so, maybe we did all stand together, but only some of us, says the poet Merle Feld, only some of us kept a record. So I want you to think about who is standing with you, just as we did at the beginning, who's standing with you at Sinai, and who might be overlooked, who might be in that crowd, maybe not right next to you, but maybe lost in that crowd, feeling that they might be in the wrong place, feeling as if maybe they don't belong. Think about who is standing in that crowd with you and who might be overlooked. Think about who you don't see there, who isn't there, though maybe they might have come if they'd been invited or if they felt welcomed. Look around, not just at who's surrounding you right where you are, but look around, crane your neck back and forth, and who stands at the periphery? Who stands there but not quite there, unsure of whether to move forward, or just terrified about being part of that group? Maybe when the voice, the powerful voice, came forth, maybe they jumped back further than everybody else and felt too frightened, or felt that there wasn't a place for them in our huge crowd, all waiting expectantly, excitedly for God's word. So now let's look at this poem. We all stood together. My brother and I were at Sinai. He kept a journal of what he saw, of what he heard, of what it all meant to him. I wish I had such a record of what happened to me there. It seems like every time I want to write, I can't. I'm always holding a baby, one of my own or one for a friend, always holding a baby so my hands are never free to write things down. And then, as time passes, the particulars, the hard data, the who, what, when, where, why, slip away from me. And all I'm left with is the feeling. But feelings are just sounds, the vowel barking of a mute. My brother is so sure of what he heard. After all, he's got a record of it. Consonant after consonant after consonant. If we remembered it together, we could create holy time, sparks flying. If we remembered it together, we could recreate holy time, sparks flying. Thank you for, let's take away the last slide. And my wish for you, my wish for all of us, is that we remember exactly what happened this Shavuot, this year, as we approached Sinai. And if we need to write it down, let's take that opportunity to do it. Write a few words. Make a sketch, make shapes. Write it down. Part of Merle Feld's lesson here is that we all have the right, the obligation even, to keep a record, to write it down. Because she's right. We all stood at Sinai. We all stood there together. And not everybody felt they had the right to write. So let's right that wrong. Let's think about who we are, who's standing with us, who we would love to have here with us, who needs to be invited in. And can we be one of those people who beckons people towards Sinai, toward this crowd that's gathered? We're in a crowd. How does that feel after a year of pandemic? We're with a crowd. We're with all the Jews who ever were and ever will be. And we're waiting to hear what God has to tell us. Words of comfort, words of hope, words of rebuke. Get off your duffs now. You can go out into the world and create something better. What is God going to tell us, and what do we need to hear? This Shavuot 5781, after a year of pandemic, and a year when we are slowly reopening literally and figuratively, opening up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Cantor, my neighbor and friend and colleague. It was so wonderful to be able to learn from you. I have to ask, maybe you mentioned this and I missed it. The collages, are those yours?
Yes. Well, I was trying to figure out what I could legally and morally use in the presentation, and then I just thought, well, I'll use my own stuff. So I gave permission for all of that.
It's beautiful. Do you want to say anything in our last minute? I know you're coming back to host in a little while, but anything in our last minute about art and the expression that you have, you write and you do so many different kinds of creative things.
Yeah, I think I've been for the past 16 weeks, I've actually, it's almost 14 weeks, but it's a 16-week program. I've been a fellow for the Atik Maker Institute, which is based in Berkeley, and which I would never have had a chance to do, except that the pandemic meant that it was all on Zoom. And I think to the extent that we can use our hands and react expressively, it deepens our experience of Torah and our experience of what it means to live deeply and meaningfully. So. And nobody should say, oh, I do, although we all do. Oh, no, I can't draw a straight line. You don't need to draw a straight line, it turns out. Who knew? So this is accessible for all of us. Writing and art and singing. How many times have people said to you, Alana, oh, I can't, when I was in choir, when I was in second grade, the teacher told me, don't open your mouth, don't actually sing, just mouth the words. I just want to go slap those teachers, those elementary school teachers. Everybody should sing.
Absolutely.
Everybody should sing. Everybody should draw. Everybody should write.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be able to learn from you, and we'll welcome you back in a couple hours as a host.